Welcome back to the Church Resource with Dr. Chris Respass and myself,
Hey, myself.
regular Lucas Pinckard.
Whatever. You far from regular, brother.
All right, so we talked about some leadership stuff the last couple of times we got together. Kind of did your bio, which was exciting. I love prying into and I see you're wearing your Ram hat today.
Yes, I'm representing home.
So the Tar Heels
Yes.
used the Ram as their logo.
Yeah.
Because of a guy who used to be the center for them like a long time ago. Is that right?
Man, listen, I don't get in on all that.
you just
I just
rep
went
the brand.
again.
All right, cool. All right, see, here I am thinking I'm like, all right, yeah, he'll get into this. He's like, nah.
I'm not that deep. You know?
I don't care about it.
I don't care about that.
All right, so today,
I love the color.
should churches participate in sportsbook gambling on March Madness? That's that's definitely not the topic we're getting into.
Listen, we're under construction. Everybody's under construction.
Everybody's under construction.
That's it.
Today I want to talk about, let's go with conferences.
Okay.
Let's talk about conferences.
My
And
goodness,
before, because
yes.
there's a lot of different tiers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There are like the premium church leadership conferences where you're paying like $700-800 a person to go to that, plus airfare and hotel, because they only do them in Los Angeles and in Nashville,
yeah.
Orlando. What's the Atlanta?
Yes.
That's where they'll go do those. So there's that super high tier conference, which really most of us are probably not going to, right? Like we're probably not even going to buy that $400 digital package to go to that one, right? Then you've got the other kind of the mid-tier conferences where you're like $300 to $500 per person, and there's going to be some leadership stuff that's there, and then there'll be some intentional discipleship stuff. A lot of those, like in particular the Passion Conference, has a price tag around there, and it's really geared towards a specific age group, right? But what I want to talk about is more the county and the state level evangelism or equipping conferences, those types of things. And we're not talking about convention stuff necessarily, but there are some state conventions. I just got back from the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention Empower Evangelism Conference a few days ago. So a lot of us have these kind of conferences that are offered by different entities, whether it's a denominational thing or whether it's a group of churches that gets together and they want to do this type of deal.
Right.
But, versus the more of what I would think of as like the men's conference, the women's conference, the youth conference. Like, let's focus in on these that are designed to equip and educate.
Okay.
Right? So first, when you're looking at a conference and you're planning out whether or not, or you see an advertisement of a conference, what things are you looking for to evaluate whether or not this is going to be a conference that Dr. Respass attends, where Dr. Respass graces these people with his presence?
Okay.
Yeah.
Listen, man, I'm going to be honest. I look at the price, and then that helps I look at the price, and then I think about the content, because what I found is, you're an avid reader. I'm aspiring to be an avid reader.
You get to take some time off now that you walk the stage.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah,
I'm an avid book buyer. How about
come on, baby. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Sometimes I'm a sucker for the book cover.
Yeah.
Right. And so it looks good. It sounds great. Then you get in it and it's like, this is trash. Right. I wasted my time and money. And I found that whether it's AI or an incredibly enlightened marketing team, a lot of these conferences have, titles and
they sound cool.
They sound so cool.
Catalyst.
Come on,
Empower,
and all this stuff. And
equip.
Right. And
other things that start with the E and sound energetic.
And I'm all energized by
it.
Right. Even the classes. And you get in there and you find out that it's not really what it sounded like it was going to be.
Yeah.
And so, all jokes aside, when I'm looking at, I'm honestly thinking about what deficiencies have I recognized either in myself or in the ministry.
Yeah.
Right. There are already things kind of swirling in my head that I feel like I need some help in trying to address. And for whatever reason, I haven't identified a book, because I found, my mind just tends to kind of go back to the same resources.
Right.
So I'm thinking about my what deficiency or what need or where I think we need to be going. Then honestly, I really am looking at the price, because to your point, a number of these conferences that at least have the facade of value, right?
Right.
The way you kind of hear other people kind of buzzing about it, very often is in a place that I'm not willing to travel.
That's a huge obstacle for so many people. Like we're
Listen.
lucky being in the DFW area.
Exactly.
Right? That like, and we were talking about this a little bit when we were prepping this episode, is that, if there's a conference in Grapevine that for me, like the price point is right, it's a 30-minute drive.
Right.
I know I'm not going to have to pay for airfare. I'm not going to be spending a couple of $100 a night on a hotel.
Right.
So that takes my budget pressure, because that's honestly one of the things we got to look at,
Listen,
right? Like what's that budget pressure that
exactly.
you've got? Especially if you're in a church of less than 100 people.
Yeah.
Knowing like, all right, so is this something I'm going to split with the church? Is this something that the church is completely on the hook for?
Exactly.
Or is this something I'm out of pocket for? And if so,
it changes
that completely changes the game.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, because driving a half hour, like, all right, so I got to get up at 5 o'clock instead of at 6 or whatever I would normally get up at. Versus, hey, I'm gonna stay there, but that means it's gonna cost us another $400 for like 2 nights at a hotel, even with those conference discounts and all of that stuff that they throw on top of it. Then you got to think about meals, and all that stuff. Like it's real quickly, even these free conferences become $500
easy
if you're you're having to travel, you're having to buy food and those kinds of things, right? So expense and travel is a massive thing that sometimes we see that free and we're like, oh yeah, that's no problem. And unless you are gonna park your car under the bridge like you're trying to outlast a tornado, then it ain't free.
Hey, listen, the only thing is free is salvation.
That's it.
And it costs Jesus something. But watch this. Here's another thing that I look at when we're talking about those breakout sessions at these conferences. How long are the breakout sessions?
Oh, that's a good call.
Because if it's 30 minutes, they slicking at 25 minutes, whatever it is the new increment is. Mm-hmm. If it's 30 minutes, you can guarantee you're not asking any questions.
No.
They're not answering anything that they probably haven't already written in their blog.
Right.
Or they're one of the chapters in their books if they have one. And so if it's the 30-minute breakout, I'm not feeling it.
Yeah. What is that? What's that kind of like sweet spot for the breakout time period for you?
I think it's 45 minutes.
Okay.
I know it's not, it's right there between an hour and 30 minutes. 45 minutes, I think, is perfect.
Okay.
Because the hour, you're sick of hearing them and you want to get more opportunities to hear other speakers. And when it's an hour, you're just going to be limited, right?
Yeah.
Especially if there are plenary sessions, right? An hour's too long. 30 minutes, they're just going to tell you what they want you to hear and then herd you on to whatever the next session is. I think 45 minutes, it allows the presenter to present enough information to generate some discussion, and also, if the time is managed well, right, to allow people to present some questions, that would benefit at least that particular group.
Right.
What about you? What time do you think?
So I'm not, and the 2 hour breakout I think is too long.
Okay.
But like that hour to maybe hour 10 is what I'm really looking for, because I almost want the guarantee that if I've got questions, I can ask.
Yeah.
Where that 45 minutes, you're right, those guys have to manage that time so well. And I've been a pastor long enough to know that when I'm going to a place with other pastors, like we don't know when to shut up and shut off.
No.
Right?
Nope.
And simple, clear, and concise is very rarely our strong suit. Like we have, and that's one of the things when we plan a sermon, I get, depending on the week, I'm not in the Jimmy Draper school of like, I get 20 hours a week to focus on.
Oh, yeah, not at all.
Right? Like, as the only pastor at the church,
yeah.
If I've got 6 to 8 hours of like good study time, then that's all. But I still got to take all of that and squeeze it into 25, 35, 45 minutes, wherever that needs to be. And I feel like every week I'm running up against it. Mm-hmm. And so if there's a topic that I'm being asked to speak on, I find that I'm in that same. Even if I script it out, right, then I try to use up as much of that time as I can. Whereas, if I know that I've got an hour 15 to present, I build in some time whenever I'm preparing for those things for some Q&A.
Gotcha.
And that's really like that's what I want.
Yeah. So the conferences that we've done at the church, because you mentioned, there are those times. And for me, honestly, those are probably the ones that I've gotten the most value out
For
of.
sure.
Where a church or a number of churches have come together to pull this thing off. Whenever we do that, we focus on an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, that's the typical Bible study length, at least
Yep.
for us. Typical Bible study length. That hour is good, but I've just found that in these larger events, certainly the pay, the higher priced ones, they just don't dedicate that much time. I think it's too much going on.
Yep.
Yeah,
and so when you're vetting, this is a trick that I've learned over the years is like I'll look at the stuff in the breakout sessions and like they'll have a couple of ringers, right? That they know you're coming to see, this person you want. Frank Turk was at the last one, the guy who does cross-examined. So great apologist, Dr. Frank Turk. They know they've got Frank Turk in the breakout sessions. Everybody's going to Frank Turk's breakout sessions, right? And people will end up going to the breakout sessions as a whole because their pastor or their leaders will be like, I'm going to go to the Frank Turk thing. So this car is not leaving to go to Buffalo Wild Wings, so y'all all have to stay here.
Right.
So there's that. And, with those folks, a lot of times you get the same stuff that you find, like you were saying, in their books, online, on their blogs, whatever, or they'll have them speak at a main session.
Right.
And so what you end up with now is all of these other folks that have some interesting topics, and you may want to go to them, or you may want to know a little bit more about them, or they've got an interesting topic, but you don't know the person. One of the things that I've started doing is, because you get these emails months ahead of time.
Right.
I'll shoot an email to the person who's leading the class. Like I'll click on the link, figure out who they are, and be like, hey, listen, thinking about coming to your breakout session at the Empower Conference this year, can you kind of give me, a high-level overview of what you'll be teaching and whether or not this is a class you think I need to attend, or could I get all the stuff whenever I look at the digital package online?
Right.
And just ask that. And there's a lot of folks that, you think, well, I don't want to bother them with the email, this, that, and the other. Well, if that's going to be the difference between you figuring out whether or not there was value in that place that you were, where you could sit there and actually ask questions versus having a bunch of questions from the digital thing, like that 5-minute email is 100% worth it, and they'll be excited about it. And if you end up in that class, you can be like, hey, listen, I'm Lucas. I emailed you that. Oh, man, so glad that you came. And now you've got the opportunity to make an even bigger connection with them whenever you're figuring out that stuff.
That's good.
Have you ever put on one of these conferences like this, or been part of the planning team?
I've put them on much smaller scale, but we've done them, or I've been close to them, whether it was a marriage kind of conference or subject specific conference. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things in this industry that a lot of people don't know about is that there will be. Because I think we have this romanticized view that everybody that's there is people that like the organization wants to be there because they think they add value.
Right.
Peel back the curtain a little bit. That when it comes to some of these big conferences, there are some business elements to it, and there are folks, there are publishers who pay to have people that are there, and so that's another thing that email really kind of vets out. Is you can figure out, is this a consulting company who paid to have a slot? Not that they aren't going to give you value,
right,
but you know that when things come up towards the end, that they'll be like, all right, well, in order to increase, the giving at your church, you need to do this 10-step evaluation, and then they don't give you any of the steps for that 10-step evaluation, and instead they're like, well, you can email us and, get that. And now you're in there, a little funnel.
That's it.
And you're doing all that. And I found this out a while back that was actually something that happened whenever we were looking at it. They're like, all right, so how much are you going to pay for or how valuable are your breakout sessions? I was like, what are you talking about? And if somebody wanted to pay to get one, if you can't get it filled, it's like, you are kidding me. And that's something that happened. Not to say that those things don't have value, that you can't learn something from it, or that the people that are running them are insincere.
Sure.
But there is very, very few things that if you are expecting high value and then you end up in the middle of what feels like a sales pitch,
yes,
that will turn somebody off to a conference more than. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Yes, yeah. I not in the planning, certainly in the attending.
In the attending, yeah.
The scale of what we were doing was more local, regional kind of stuff. So it wasn't on that scale, but you can see it, you can feel it. I think that's one of the reasons why other pastors and those in ministry who have incredible content, are great communicators, you never hear about them, right? Because it's an industry. I mean, or let me say it the other way. Why is it that we often hear about the same people all the time?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Granted, it's not that they don't have anything to say, but they're saying it again.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, right?
You know, and that's not to, to begrudge anybody or to disparage anyone. But the reality is, because you're talking about what, part of my process of vetting is this a new voice, right?
Right.
Is this the same message, right? There are some who are able, notwithstanding their popularity, to bring what feels like new and fresh content.
Yeah, new material.
Every time. And then there are others that it just seems like, they added Alfredo sauce this time.
Hey, it's this again.
Yeah,
Yep.
that kind of thing. And that's what I try to guard against because, time, we can't get that back. Like you mentioned earlier, the price point and the all the related costs, is it worth me spending $700 to hear three guys that I've, not necessarily have a heart connection with,
right?
But I've heard them before and I've got some of their stuff, or is it worth it to, email a guy who may not be as popular, but their content is going to be spot on with what where I feel like I need to get some help.
This worked out really well for us the last couple of years. One of the people that we kind of touched base with was Mark Clifton. Wrote a book called Reclaiming Glory, which we both got copies of, and we're looking at that book, and it will be one that we cover here on this podcast. He did a breakout session on dying churches, and we're not a dying church.
Right.
But I had heard his name before. I'd seen the book around. And so, those things are in his credentials. Shot off the email and get it back. It's like, hey, we're going to cover not just like how to revive a dying church. What are the signs of a dying church? How to keep your church from dying. Those are the 3 parts of the talk. Okay, that's not on the blurb.
Right.
So I'm like, hey, I'm going to check that out. And when we go and we look at it and we listen to the stuff that he's talking about, it spoke so much to the heart of what we were doing. And then having that interaction, being able to ask a couple of questions, and afterwards going up, shaking his hand, and saying, "Hey, listen, I sent you the email," and he was like, "Hey, email me and let me know in 6 weeks how you were able to implement some of this stuff, any way that I can support you." And now I'm emailing with one of the guys who's helping and to do this kind of stuff. The same thing happened this year. There was a guy he's the missions director for youth at the state convention level in Georgia.
Okay.
He came and he was talking about how to reach the most anxious generation, right? And a lot of his stuff is based off of a book called Anxious Generation by a guy named Jonathan Haidt. And when you look at the way he presents the information that Haidt did as a social thing, as you present it as it relates to the church, well, now you have an opportunity to figure out, like, hey, how much are we actually contributing to this? And and the reason I say that is because I'm going to tease our next episode a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
How much are we contributing to the anxiety of these other generations by intentionally putting them in front of screens in order to achieve church goals?
Wow.
So next week, we're going to be talking a little bit about online ministry, what it looks like, and whether or not we're contributing in that factor. So before we wrap up, though, I want to ask you, what are 2 things that you absolutely hate about conferences, and then we'll follow it up with what are 3 things that you love about them.
So one of the things that I hate about conferences is what I feel like is the bait and switch. We've talked about it today, where it seems like it's going to be one thing and it's completely, not that. And then the second thing is that subtle commercial push, right? You can't put your finger on it, so it's not like it's not overt and blatant.
Yeah.
But you still feel like somewhere along the lines, this was just a mass infomercial.
Yep. Yeah. I'm completely with you on the second one. For sure. The thing that I have found that I've hated the most is leaving and feeling like I got nothing out of it. And I never can tell if that's a me issue or if that's a content issue. And so to those ends, I kind of hate going to these things alone because I realize when I go alone that I'm not getting as much. So if there is a free conference or something like that, man, we'll announce it at church. I'll try to get as many folks as we can, like rallied together to go to it, so that I can figure out what they're hearing that I'm not, and vice versa. Because you'd be so surprised how much folks open up. All right, so 3 things you love about conferences. Go.
So I love the fact that in many cases they're presenting new ideas, and so you're getting to not only hear about that. In some cases, you're also getting to see it. Especially if it's in a venue where they're having not only the breakout sessions but the vendors, vendor booths and.
Because there's always that book that they're giving away. There's always one
and
conference book.
I don't care. I'm getting it.
Yeah, 100%. It might just take up space on the shelf.
That's it.
But that's it. It's going in the collection.
I'm getting it. So, I love the fact that new content is there. And two, getting to talk to the people around me and to kind of listen in on some other kinds of conversations, right? Because sometimes I feel like it's so philosophical at times.
Yeah.
Putting legs on these things, there's often a gap. So being able to brainstorm with some other guys and meet new pastors, because I've got some long-lasting relationships from people I didn't know from a can of paint.
Yeah.
But we sat beside each other and exchanged cards and became friends.
That's
cool. What about you?
Yeah, well, you got one more, man. That was only 2. You got 3 things. We got to outweigh it.
Oh, my
got to outweigh the things we hate with the things we love.
Yeah. So the last, what else do I like? Honestly, okay, this has nothing to do with the conference itself, but a lot of them now include worship.
Yeah.
And that helps me stay grounded and not slip into the dot the I, cross the T, work part of it.
Yeah.
It helps me to stay focused. Now that this is ultimately about people coming to know Jesus and serving Him by serving His people and taking it seriously by growing myself and having the kind of outlook that wants to help the church take the next step to reach more people for Jesus. So
real quick, I love the Q&A portions of the breakout sessions because I like to know that I'm not the only one that feels a certain kind of way about the information that we're getting and not getting, positively or negatively. But also I like asking the question that maybe nobody else is thinking about. And those 2 things are really fun for me. One is that sort of solidarity, and the other. The second, man, I'm right there with you. It's the relationships. A guy I met at this last conference, a guy named Rob DeLong. He is a strongman competitor outside of San Antonio. He and I met each other. We were talking for a little bit at the conference, and then his strongman coach was competing this past weekend at the Arnold Classic. Placed 4th in the pro strongman thing. Come on. So, but we're texting back and forth. I'm like, oh, bro, we got the log, And so there's those relationships that are just invaluable that you make with other pastors kind of across the state. Yep. And you'd be so surprised at how often those connections come back up, that you don't see them but once a year, and you can kind of catch up a little bit on those things. But that support system, and remembering to reach out to those guys, like if you need prayer, if you got something going on, because that's a big help. And the last thing for me is also the worship. Yeah. We get so, I think, set in like these are the songs that we do, and coming to a place where you've got maybe 3 or 4 different worship teams that are either combining together, or one worship team is one day, one worship team is another day from another church, and you're getting songs that maybe they've written for their church that are for their church and for worship that you're hearing for the first time, or just new interpretations of old stuff. Right. You're just like, oh, you know what? That would be really cool if we did that. That would be really cool if we did that. So that's awesome stuff. Well, hey, I appreciate the time. Hey, as always, honored, bro. I know how valuable the doctor's time is. That's the thing right there, number 1. Boom. But yeah, man, I appreciate it again. Conferences are a mixed bag, but hopefully this will give you guys some information and some techniques to use to make sure that the conferences you go to are worth your time. If you guys have any suggestions on resources that you want us to check out or topics for us, you can email us at thechurchresource@gmail.com, and make sure that you tune in next week when we talk a little bit about whether or not digital platforms are worth your investment. Till then, you guys have good, give, and we'll see you. Holla.